We may not have gone where we intended to go, but we think we have ended up where we needed to be. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is, are we in a state of anarchy? Joining us this evening on the show are Javid Yusuf, attorney at law and author; Shanaka De Silva, President's Counsel; Rajiv Amrasurya, former Secretary of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, also an attorney at law. Also joining us tonight on the show is Mr. J.M. Vijay Bandara, attorney at law. Very good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to Face the Nation tonight. Let me start off tonight's show with Javid Yusuf, attorney at law and author. Javid, now when you take a look at today what happened, many are dubbing this as state-sponsored violence. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's not surprising that people are dubbing it as state-sponsored violence, because it is a duty of the state, at the very least, to provide security to all citizens, those who are protesting, those who are expressing dissent and engaging and exercising their fundamental rights. But after an admirable 30 days in which the youth were protesting at Galle-Face peacefully and without any harm to anybody else, and with a great deal of self-restraint, today everything was shattered. And if you look at the sequence of events, that the guys who went to Galle-Face and as well as assaulted the people in front of temple trees, it is difficult to resist the conclusion that this was state-sponsored, because they were coming straight away from a meeting at temple trees. Now, from what reports I have received and I have seen, please correct me if I am wrong, if they came from behind temple trees and came to Galle Road and they were proceeded towards Galle-Face, they would have passed the Kalpiti police station. So that itself would have alerted the Kalpiti police as well as any other security which was stationed around Galle-Face that something untoward was going to happen, and preventive action should have been taken. When preventive action is not taken, then the whole burden is on the state to explain why this happened. And as a result, a situation where we could have been proud, and indeed we were proud, we drew the attention of the world how to peacefully protest. Exercising our democratic right for 30 months has been just thrown to smithereens within a matter of several hours. And violence, it has triggered off a chain of violence which has to be brought under control as quickly as possible.
Javid, if you are saying that this is state-sponsored violence that took place in Sri Lanka today, who do you hold responsible for this?
Well, ultimately, it is the law enforcement agencies. Their duty is to ensure the rule of law, protection of the public, the people, and so on. And finally, the buck stops with the president, because he is the commander-in-chief. He is the in charge of all the forces and so on. So they have to answer. They have to at least give an explanation which the public can consider and examine to see whether it's right or wrong.
So Javid, when you look at the past of Sri Lanka, we are no alien to this situation. We saw something very similar happening in 1983 with the riots in Sri Lanka, which the minority groups were marginalized. We saw in 88-89 the riots that were propagated by people of Sri Lanka as well. As a result of that, many people even lost their lives. And today, we see this in the present context as well. Sorry. So in your opinion, do you think the president should have taken more concrete action against this move?
No, definitely so. And I don't mean concrete action today. I mean that over a period of time, there should have been a mechanism or a process set in motion to ensure that nothing untoward will happen. Because during the past 1 month, or even more, I think, from the time the farmers started protesting about the fertilizer issues, we saw spontaneous protests all over the country by informal groups. They were not from the organized working class like the trade unions. We realized that over a period of time, with all the difficulties people are facing, that this is an angry country, an angry nation, and an angry people, despairing, innocent. And so much so that even in the queues, when they stand for petrol or gas, the tempers are so afraid that they start fighting over. So we knew that this was at the tipping point. There should have been extra caution. There should have been wisdom in handling and preventing and preempting a situation like this from happening. Right. So I think definitely the government has to take the blame.
So Javed, when you look at the incidents that took place in the last 2 days, I don't want to look back too far. Just let's take a look at what happened last 2 days. We saw the manner in which Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa went to Anuradhapura. He was booed off from the temples as well. We saw the manner in which how news was circulating in the social media that the president had got the letter of resignation of the Prime Minister, but that was not confirmed until this afternoon. Then we heard also the story, what happened this morning, where there was a meeting with the local government representatives as well as a group of supporters of the SLPP at Temple Trees. Don't you think that action needs to be taken against the Prime Minister himself for instigating this violence? And individuals like Johnston Fernando, who was there at Temple Trees at that time and was making provocative statements, not directly telling the people, but making insinuations. Don't you think in the law that penal action or criminal procedure could be meted out against these individuals in question, including the Prime Minister?
Yes, I think when you look at a question like this, you have to look at two aspects. One is political responsibility and the other is legal responsibility. Politically, those who are entrusted with power and position and who are entrusted with certain duties, it is very clear and it is easy to find out who is responsible. That's why I said that the president, the buck stops with the president, because constitution is head of state, head of government and head of cabinet, so everything is there. But when it comes to individual culpability, whether it's a prime minister or any other minister or any individual, certainly there has to be an investigation, and if there is sufficient evidence, then the matter should be referred to the courts and action taken. But individual responsibility and political responsibility are two different things, because individual responsibility would require a whole gamut of evidence, and it has to conform to all the fundamentals of law enforcement and criminal sanctions and so on. So I cannot say for sure that X, Y or Z is personally culpable without examining the totality of evidence. So that is another aspect which certainly requires investigation, right, because so many lives have been lost, so many people have been injured, and so much of harm has been caused not only to Sri Lankan society but also to the international image, right, of the country.
Thank you very much, Javed Yusuf, attorney at Law and Order. I now move our direction towards Shanaga De Silva, President's Counsel. Now, Mr. De Silva, we saw some gripping footage today that was shot by our cameramen. We received footage from our ardent viewers, social media activists, so on and so forth. But you saw all this firsthand because your office was right opposite where all this took place. Tell us a little bit about your experience this morning.
Well, in the morning, essentially what happened was there were these people who came from towards Temple Trees. My office is between Temple Trees and Galle Face. So they came from towards Temple Trees. They had already gone and attacked the so-called minor Gama, and they were going towards Galle Face. Now, violent, they had poles, they had batons. Now, in a situation like that, one would expect the law enforcement agencies to become active and prevent what was going to happen. And we know the function of law enforcement agencies is not to go and investigate after the event or pick up the people who are dead, but their whole purpose of law enforcement is maintaining law and order, not detecting breaches. So at that time there was a complete breakdown of law and order. People were marching on Galle Road. Now, where is this place that we are talking about? We are talking about from Kollupitiya Junction to Galle Face, the roundabout, right? Now, that, if at all, is the most sensitive place in our country. You have the Prime Minister's residence, you have the President's Secretariat, you have the President's house, you have all the hotels, you have the Ministry of Finance. Where is the security? You have a group of people marching and no one stops them. And you know where they are marching. You know why they are marching. It's apparent to any person on the road. And there was nothing to stop them. And then towards afternoon, after all the events at Galle Face had happened, there was the backlash which came. And people were being hounded out, identified. They knew, they could identify the people, and they were picking them, and they were being, I would say, assaulted. And again, no action being taken, no prevention being taken.
So even
by that time the situation was well beyond control, right? So I would say that it was a total collapse of law and order. And mind you, this is Kollupitiya Junction, Kollupitiya police station is just there, and the Prime Minister's house is there. And if this kind of thing can happen there, what can you talk about law and order?
So what you're trying to say is, Ms. De Silva, even a child would know what the intention of these protesters were right after the meeting which was held between the Prime Minister and the group of protesters. They were armed with clubs, they were armed with batons, they were on a mission to attack the Gotagama individuals as well. So you are saying the police turned a blind eye, or they were the bystanders in this entire protest?
Essentially, right? Because it would have been clear to anybody, right? I mean, police force is also supposed to be a professional force, right? Now we know that Mainagama was there, we know that Gota Go Home was there, right? They were going on for days and days, and they were quite peaceful. And we know that a meeting was planned at the Prime Minister's residence. So one must anticipate that something will happen. Don't you take precautionary measures? Right. Now we saw that near Parliament, when Parliament was sitting, precautionary measures were taken. And in fact it went beyond precautionary measures. And we all saw what happened. Now shouldn't that kind of action have been taken in relation to this situation also?
So, Mr. De Silva, we are a country that have been battered by terrorism. Just a few years ago, we saw the April 21st attacks as well, which was a complete failure of the intelligence system in Sri Lanka. What was the state intelligence services doing at this point of time? Doesn't that beg an answer? 4 people have died. Number of individuals are already in hospital. Don't you think the system has failed somewhat?
I don't think this is a matter where intelligence services were required.
It was
so evident. Everybody knew about it, right? I mean, didn't people know that people were coming, or 5,000 people, or whatever number was coming to Temple Trees? They came on invitation. They didn't barge into the place. They walked in there. They came invited. There was an event organized, and we know what the event was for. So, I mean, one doesn't need intelligence for that. Yes, you need intelligence in your head, not intelligence services, right? So any person with common sense, any police officer should have known that. I mean, if we have a cricket match, school cricket matches, we are ready, the police are ready. What were they doing? I have no answer to that question. Right?
Thank you very much, Mr. De Silva, President's Counsel. The question that begs the answer is the fact that what was the law enforcement authorities doing at this point of time? What was the system doing at this point of time? And right now we are in the situation because of certain political parties trying to get headway in the current economic crisis, and today look at our poor nation. I now move my attention to Rajiv Amarsurya, former Secretary of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Rajiv, because I picked Mr. De Silva's and Javid's brain on the situation with regard to what happened today, I want to rather ask you a technical question, because we've seen this play right now in Sri Lanka for a long period of time with regard to how politicians are appointed, how cabinet ministers are appointed, how they tender their resignations, and the president says that he has not accepted the resignation, and then the cabinet of ministers continue to function in the cabinet portfolios. We've seen this play in Sri Lanka in the last few weeks, and we've witnessed it right throughout. Now, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, based on a letter that is being taken the rounds in the social media, which does not even have a proper date, which cannot be independently verified, I must mention that here on the show tonight. It's very clear that the Prime Minister's office has also mentioned that he has tendered his resignation to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. What's next?
Well, if the president would have to accept the resignation, we have not heard from the president. However, about, I think, was it 2 days back, there was a communique from the president's office saying that there was a request to the prime minister to resign. So if one puts 2 and 2 together, one would assume that the president would accept this resignation. Then, of course, the president would have to then call upon a member of parliament who commands the majority of parliament to form a government. That would be the usual course, but of course now there's a lot of proposals which have been submitted, and there are calls for maybe a national unity government. So maybe it will be up to the party leaders also to suggest somebody to fill those shoes and form a government of maybe interim government, a caretaker government, whatever we call it, which represents in this crisis. This is like a war cabinet they had in England during the Second World War. So to have a representative cabinet of all the parties, all the leaders, all those who can contribute and commence.
This could have been a cabinet which probably would steer the country's economy in the right trajectory.
Yes.
But unfortunately, we've now come to the point to appoint a war cabinet. Right, Rajiv?
Basically, when I say war cabinet, what I actually meant was we are in dire economic straits. So it's similar to a war. One has to get over this situation, and it will take some time. So you need the best possible people to be able to make the right decisions.
Right. So let's say, Rajiv, let's say that no one in the parliament, because we saw the manner in which how Sajid Premadasa, the opposition leader, had clearly articulated to the president that if the 21st Amendment to the Constitution does not come into play, he will not take over the post of Prime Minister. Then we've heard similar sentiments from individuals like Andrew Kumar Dissanayake as well. So what happens if no one is willing to take charge of the role of Prime Minister? What happens then?
I don't think that would come to that situation. There will be obviously somebody who will be able to take that role. But I think before we come to that, I think there's a responsibility on the part of the political parties to step in at this point. We are in a crisis situation. On one hand, as I mentioned, we have economic crisis, but now we have a different crisis also as of today. We have issue of law and order. There's an issue of incidents taking place across the country, which has to be brought to a complete stop. So we need a prime minister and a cabinet which has acceptance among the people. So if one goes back to maybe somebody within the present government or the government we had till the resignation of the prime minister, then again people might not accept that, and we don't want escalation of the violence we have already. So we need somebody who can appease the people, and to that extent, whether it's the SJP or whether it's any of the other parties, they need to, I think, step up to this national crisis, step away from political difficulties they may have. Certainly there may be difficulties to manage a government with a small number of members, but in this situation, in this crisis, I think it is incumbent upon maybe the leader of the opposition or somebody within the opposition to come forth, take over this responsibility, and form a cabinet even for a short period of time. But in response to your question, if there is nobody in parliament, then one has to bring somebody from outside. Maybe somebody from the nationalists can resign, and then somebody can come in, somebody who's suitable to steer the country. But it is now of paramount importance. One cannot wait for weeks and months. This has to happen tomorrow.
But based on the constitution of the country, if President Gotabaya Rajapaksa thinks that Mahinda Rajapaksa still commands the confidence of the parliamentarians, he may appoint him as the prime minister.
There are two issues here, Shan. One is, of course, the government has a fair majority. We saw that when the post of the deputy speaker was elected. The realities are different on the ground. So to that extent, if one goes by the numbers, purely by the numbers, then one has an issue with you go back to somebody in this present government. When I said someone who commands the numbers, it should be someone outside the present government who can also garner a fair amount of support. There are various groups now which have broken away from the government. So if one does the math, there are scenarios when one can reach even 113 members. Even if you don't, one must also remember the 2015 UMP government, when that came into being, it was a minority government. But even the 19th Amendment was passed by that government. So even if one is not does not even have a simple majority, but say a several number of members less, that too may be sufficient to get over this immediate issue.
So Rajiv, is this enough? Is this what the people want? The Prime Minister to resign and appoint a new interim government? Because the call of the majority of the people are that not only the Prime Minister, but the President also should resign.
Yes. One must actually go back to where the genesis of these protests. The call was for the President, the slogan, "Gota, go home." Simple slogan, and that is where all this started. And if one goes to Galle, one would see that there are several different demands by the different groups there, but one common singular demand which everyone is calling for is Gota, go home. So that is basically for the President either to be removed, impeached, or for him to resign. It was, I think, a political compromise which was put forward by many quarters, given the fact that, of course, the President is elected by the people. It is not easy to have a President taken out. One has to go through an impeachment process. One needs 2/3 in Parliament. The opposition does not have that 2/3, whether they like it or not. And because of that, it was a political compromise to say, well, the Prime Minister and the government to go, a new Prime Minister and government to come in place. But now we are at that situation. The Prime Minister is said to have tendered his resignation. I am sure by tomorrow that will be confirmed, and then a new government will have to come in. But the question, the important question is whether those who are protesting, the protests originally were at Galle. If one thinks that the protests are only at Galle, that such a person would be sadly mistaken. This sentiment is now found across the country. Today I came down from Kandy, and a little while ago, and I saw right down Kandy Road, there were people on the road. They were checking these buses whether they had people who came into this village. whether they were going back, they were checking buses. So the people have mobilized. And why would they mobilize far out? That is because they have the same feeling, same belief, same cause as now as the youngsters have at Golface. So it is I believe that it is unlikely that the people of this country would be satisfied if it is satisfied by the Prime Minister leaving. There will be a call for the President also to resign or to be removed. And I think the recent developments which took place, the President came before the media and said that he had made mistakes, several mistakes, on the fertilizer issue, not going to the IMF. The Finance Minister in Parliament said that this government had made a mistake as far back as soon as they were elected by cutting the taxes, which were again the conceding mistakes which were made by the President. And then the incidents of today. Every one of us knew that there could be something of this nature taking place. We were all expecting, we were told that the Prime Minister might resign, but that was not taking place. And then suddenly, when we expected the Prime Minister to resign, then we heard that there was a gathering of his supporters at Temple Trees. So it was expected, and as the Commander-in-Chief, ultimately, as Mr. Yusuf mentioned, he is responsible.
Right.
So in those circumstances, I believe that there will be a call beyond what is taking place now.
Well, thank you very much, Rajiv Amarsuri, Attorney at Law, former Secretary of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Mr. President, if you are accepting that you've made a mistake, and if you are accepting the fact that you as the Commander-in-Chief had the responsibility for the actions which transpired today, listen to the call of the majority of the people who are on the streets. Look nowhere else. Just look at Sri Lanka as a whole, and you would see what the people require for you to do. Just go home. We now move our attention towards Mr. J. Vijay Bandara, Attorney at Law. Mr. Vijay Bandara, in your opinion, do you think that Sri Lanka is in a state of anarchy at the moment?
Yes, I have to say yes, for this reason. According to the legal theory of governance, it is universally accepted concept that whoever who come to power at an election, between two elections, they have to get justification from the people to be in power. That is universally accepted concept we talk in constitutional law. This government came into power spreading so many disharmony among communities, among religions, and also so many misconception about infertilization by Shafi, etc. And gradually, with the expansion of social media, people tend to talk among the people, and their knowledge is comparatively more higher than if you consider the 70s or 80s or 90s. So awareness is very high. Therefore, gradually, step by step, this government headed by His Excellency the President lost the justification. Lost the justification. It's a constantly, day by day, gradually, they lost. Today incident, I say it is the final. Every time people had very high hope, government acted contrary to the sentiment of people. For example, now the recent time in the Parliament, when we are in a very serious crisis, if you see the behavior in the Parliament and the gimmick they did, Deputy Speaker was asked, we don't know how, to resign, then he was nominated and elected. That shows that they don't care the sentiments of people. They don't care the sentiment of people. Thereby, they lost the justification.
Musical chairs, Mr. Vijay Bandara. They were playing musical chairs.
Exactly. They don't care. And also look at the political culture. There are no seniors in the Parliament except 5 people. All others are bow down to them, irrespective of their seniority. So, this political culture is centered on particular named people. That is one of the issue. That is the reason for people lost trust. So, I analyze this loss of trust in three different ways. One is His Excellency's arbitrariness throughout his term. Second is his inefficiency. I can give examples. Third is misleading media campaign. In these three lines, as at today, he found pale in the mind of people. Now, they concede that 20th Amendment, they said that we need power, we need to give prosperity to the nation, therefore give the power, and they gave. What is the only result? Now, recently Cabinet has passed a resolution saying that 20th Amendment is no more required after 1.5 years or so, or 1 year. So, what did they achieve by passing it? These are the ground for people to lose trust. Only achievement was appointing of a finance minister who is a dual citizen. That's it.
So, Mr. Vijayabandara, we'll get back to all this that you made in your opening remarks in a bit from now, momentarily. But I want to drag your attention to the curfew that was imposed in Sri Lanka a couple of hours ago, which was indefinitely, and the reports now say that it was to be imposed up until 7 a.m. tomorrow, but now it has been indefinitely postponed based on the reports that we are hearing right now. But what is important to understand at this very moment of time is, Mr. Vijayabandara, even though there is a curfew in Sri Lanka, there are protesters on the streets, burning the houses of politicians, going to Madhamulanam, going to Kurunagala, going to Colombo. Even right now at Temple Trees, a couple of hours ago there was a tear gas attack as well when the curfew was imposed. Do you think that the people don't care anymore about security forces? They don't care anymore about politicians. They want this regime out, and that's exactly what they want, and they're very clear about it.
Yes, I do think, let me quote from Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is your people coming to overthrow a government as rebels. It is justified universally. Let me quote the preamble to Universal Declaration of Human Rights read thus. It is essential if a man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against the tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Now, what's happened during last 3 months or so? People don't get their basic needs: no fuel, no gas, no electricity, no foods. Therefore, basic needs were not provided. Government was inefficient to the level that government has failed to give basic needs of people, even for those who not rich or poor, everybody.
So what I don't understand is, Mr. Vijayabandara, now curfew has been strictly imposed up until 7 a.m. Tomorrow morning, that's Tuesday morning. Then we had the state of emergency that was declared by this government in power as well, which was vehemently condemned by many quarters. But despite all this, there's still violence taking place in Sri Lanka. There's still protesters out on the streets. They are demanding that this government go home. So don't you think this is the time for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to bow down from his post as president and give it to a caretaker government and let the parliament decide as to who they want to appoint as a president and prime minister?
Yes, if he does, that is the best solution right now, but I do not predict that to happen. This is a revolution. There is a limit for people to tolerate. When government trying to mislead people and not live up to the expectation or the words they given. People has lost confidence, and also they have no other alternative. As you rightly asked, curfew is disregarded in totality, emergency is disregarded and disobeyed in totality. Therefore, no law and order. Even right now, if the information is correct, there is no Prime Minister, no cabinet, not even a Minister of Home Affairs or Public Security, other than the President. Therefore, my prediction is that this set of government with the Podu Jana Peramuna having a majority of about 130 seats, they will not abide to the sentiment of people, never. Even I predict today, they can easily show, definitely there will be more than 113 or more will sign and send a letter to President, then he can say he is the person who have the command of the majority of the parliament. I have no option according to constitution other than appointing him. President himself has assured even by association delegated that he will look into those proposals in terms of the constitution. That's what he has said. What is required in contemporary crisis is not in terms of the constitution, in terms of the conventions. When you are rejected by the people throughout the country, constantly, parties, civil organization, professional organization, now today all the power factors, including the administrative service, they have issued statements saying that they will strike from tomorrow. So there is a total rejection. Therefore, convention demand, if you are rejected and if you lost your justification to hold power, you have to resign.
Right.
But I do not predict that to happen.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. James Vijay Bandar, attorney at law. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate right is Sharon Benedict, and to my immediate left is Azra Hassan. But before I start the show tonight, Sharon, you were on site today. You were reporting on radio, you were reporting on TV as to what happened with regard to the protest. Tell us, in your experience as a journalist, what did you experience firsthand?
Well, Shamir, I've heard many stories about the riots in '83 and what happened in the past. I wasn't around at that time, but today, seeing what I saw, walking along these roads and seeing these things for the first time, I really, all those memories just came back to me, all those stories and how real it was and how much fear there was. Many of our journalists, as you know, Shamir, were assaulted throughout the day. We have a few people who can't even walk because they were assaulted by various factions in the middle of all of this violence, because there is so much chaos. Shamir, you asked me what I saw. A few things that I saw while I was walking along the road. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw people just stopping buses, like our panelist was saying, stopping buses along the road and checking people, checking if they were drunk, checking if they had been at the protest site, and if by chance they found a bus with people who had been at the protest organized by the Sri Lanka Podu Jana Peramuna or gone and assaulted the Gotago Gama protesters, those people were taken out of the bus, they were assaulted, the buses were destroyed. This is, I think... They were
stripped naked as well.
And yes, I was coming to that. That was the most astonishing part, really. Many of these people were stripped naked, and they were handed back to the Prime Minister's office, the security forces who were there. But of course, the Bar Association, as usual, stepped in as well, a group of lawyers along with some Catholic priests and other clergy came to the location. They were trying to bring some calm among these protesters who had just lost it, Shamir. And also, some things that we saw was that these protesters who were at the Prime Minister's residence, who attended that meeting, they had walked out of the back gate of that, of the office, and they had begun assaulting people who were simply living in the houses that are situated adjacent to the Prime Minister's office, and that is what really aggravated a lot of the people there. The people were coming out with wrenches and various other objects because they were threatened with swords, They were threatened with batons and many other objects.
Right.
Also along the road, Shamir, if you go to the Barrier Lake right now, you will be able to see about 10 to 15 SUVs. The last time I was there, 10 to 15 SUVs in the Barrier Lake, along with about 7 to 8 buses.
Right. So we will, as a media network, continue to do our job, and we will keep the viewers fully up to date as and when developments do unfold, and we'll always be on the forefront to ensure that we tell you the story as it is. Sharon, questions?
Thank you very much, Shamir. Now, this is a question that I've been dying to ask. Well, people who are in positions that can make a difference. We always try to be politically correct. We try to be, non-partisan, not support anyone, not, overly go against anyone. But is there a point when not going against a person or trying to be in the middle is just a complete denial of the truth? Especially what happened today. I heard certain panelists on the panel agreeing that this was state-sponsored violence. So in such a situation, I'd like to direct this question, of course, to President's Counsel Chanaka de Silva. In such a situation, now we know that the President is calling for a national unity government, but let's face facts. Sri Lanka has an executive presidential system. It was an executive presidential system back in the 78. Now we have an even stronger president. Through the 20th Amendment, they tried to make it even more stronger, but this is the strongest president that we've had. This is the strongest executive presidential system that we've had. So is there really a point in changing the Prime Minister? I mean, because if the 21st Amendment is about to come, I believe even the Justice Minister, and this was said in Parliament, that it'll take another 3 months at least. But people are demanding for change now. I mean, I urge you to be as less politically correct as you can and express your sentiments on this show.
To answer you straight about being politically correct, I have never come on a program like this before. If you look at what is happening today, there are lots of professionals who have come out and who have articulated themselves. Why is that? Because I think everybody feels enough is enough. We have watched this for too long. We have stayed quiet for too long, and you can't stay quiet for very long. And that is why there are professionals like me, like Rajiv, like the two gentlemen on my side, who are articulating themselves and saying, look, I mean, we can't look at this anymore. We can't stay silent anymore. Now, to answer your question, in terms of our constitution, the president is the head of state, head of government, head of the cabinet. Right? So, who is the Prime Minister then? Prime Minister is just the person who commands the confidence of the majority in Parliament. And he sits in the cabinet. He might have certain ministries under him. And there are ministers who sit in cabinet. But the president is the head of the cabinet. It's the president's cabinet. He's the head of government. So you change all the ministers, you still have a cabinet under the same head. So what are you doing in this whole system? And that is what happened in the last occasion. We saw that. We saw the whole cabinet other than the president and the prime minister going out. But then you appoint another set of ministers and you have the president, prime minister and another set of ministers. Now you have the prime minister going. The cabinet gets dissolved immediately. But the president remains. And all the power now of the ministries is vested in the president. Now, when a new cabinet is appointed, it's his cabinet again. And we saw that not only now, I think in the early 2000s, when there was Mrs. Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga, who was the president, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe was the prime minister, there was a cabinet under Mr. Wickremesinghe, and one fine day, Mrs. Bandaranaike decided, well, I'm going to dissolve the cabinet and dissolve parliament, and everything was over. So that is the problem, that is the fault in this system. Now that being said, now we must be very careful about approaching the position right now, because we don't have a cabinet. We don't have a prime minister, we don't have any ministers. So therefore, we can't have a situation in this instance where the president also resigns. That is not good nor suitable for the country. Of course, there are provisions in the Constitution which says, well, the Speaker can come in certain circumstances, the Chief Justice might be able to act, but those are residuary powers or residuary provisions. Right? The elected person to run the country is either the President or the Parliament. Right? So,
but the Parliament is not dysfunctional, is it, Mr. De Silva? Because the Parliament is there. What the people are demanding right now is the President and the Prime Minister to leave. One went, now they're waiting for the other to go. But you are saying that if both leave, then we would be in a state of crisis.
Yeah. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that both should not leave. But I'm saying fix one and then the other should go. So you put a cabinet in place.
But we are in this mess today because of these two people. Don't you agree?
Yes, but in a couple of days, in a week, it can be done.
President's Council, De Silva.
The other option, of course, is to dissolve Parliament fully. Now, if you do dissolve Parliament, and there is only one way in which you can dissolve Parliament at this stage, that is essentially by the Parliament itself is moving for a resolution and authorizing the President to dissolve Parliament. Right? Now, if that happens, of course, the President will still be there, and then you will go into an election, a parliamentary election. So that parliamentary election will be held under the President. Right? So even for that purpose, generally when an election is being held, you have a caretaker government. At present, right, without a government, you go into a situation where the how should I say, the Parliament is dissolved, you don't have a caretaker government.
So now, let's get this clarified now, Mr. De Silva. Now the Prime Minister has resigned. Let's say hypothetically, the President accepts his brother's resignation as the Prime Minister. Now that has not been told to the media or the public yet, whether or not the President has accepted, because we are very used to now taking U-turns, stopping something, doing it again, musical chairs in Parliament. We are very accustomed to it by now, Mr. De Silva. So my question to you is, now the cabinet ceased to exist after the Prime Minister resigns. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yes,
Right.
you're correct.
If that case be the case in point that we're talking about now, how fast must the President appoint a new Prime Minister?
There is no specific time stipulated in the Constitution. However, I think the primary responsibility of the President at this stage is to appoint a Prime Minister and appoint a cabinet. Because otherwise, I mean, this is worse than a king running a country.
But what if,
right?
what if all parliamentarians who are in the legislature right now say, we don't want the President, we don't want to work with him? Then what happens?
Yes, in such a situation, the President, of course, I mean, to get him out forcefully, you have to impeach him. But the next option is for the President to resign and go. If everybody says you need to go, I think any self-respecting person will decide that.
But that's very clear, no, Mr. De Silva?
Of course it is very clear.
Now you don't have to, he doesn't have to go to Parliament to get impeached. It's very clear from the general public.
Yes, I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it has been for some time.
President's Council, De Silva, the deadlock that we're currently experiencing right now is these two arguments. There's one group saying, we can't work under this president, so president resign, then we will think about president and prime minister both resign, then we will think about forming a caretaker government. These are sentiments that were expressed by hopefuls, prime ministerial hopefuls within parliament. This is their argument. They're saying we are not going to come into power with our hands and legs tied up so that the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna can play some political ploy and intimate to the people that we too are a failure so that they can come back into power. That's one argument. Then we have the other side, the protesters or the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna group that gathered at the Prime Minister's residence today saying, if the President and the Prime Minister resign, this country will fade away into anarchy.
Very quickly, just there's breaking news that curfew which was imposed by the police up until 7 a.m. tomorrow has now been extended until 7 a.m. on Wednesday. The curfew has been extended to 7 a.m. on Wednesday. That's the news that we're getting right now. Yes, continue.
Thank you, Shamir, for that update. Yes. So, this two arguments that come. Go home, then we will come in. Don't go home because the country will fade into anarchy. Which one is correct? Because they can't coexist.
It is a little difficult to say which one is correct. I think what we should look at is what is best for the country. I think in a sense both these arguments are correct.
According to your perspective, what is best for the country?
Best for the country at this stage is President should immediately form a cabinet, appoint a Prime Minister, form a cabinet and then resign. It doesn't take a month of Sundays to do that. 2 days or 3 days is more than enough for that.
They bought the Port City Bill in 3 days.
Exactly.
Next question. Sorry.
Very quickly to Javed. Javed, people have now got fed up of the Rajapaksas. Is it a right statement to make?
Yeah, from all that we hear, it seems so. But I will answer that question if you don't mind taking into consideration the comments made by Shalan.
Yeah.
He spoke about being politically correct and whether we should always stick to these political correct, formulations. In a democracy thrives when there are clashes of ideas, and through a clash of ideas, emerges what is best to be implemented. So one should never hesitate to speak out what one feels is the truth and what is best for the country or for an issue and so on. We have generally been not so forthright except for political parties who freely express their
openly represent.
Yes. But now, starting from that, if you look at the voices that were coming from Golface, they were saying, Gota, go home. Now, most of them probably have never even seen the president face to face. So, it's not a personal thing. It is, what they mean is, it's a failure of leadership. Failure of leadership in relation to governance, which now subsequently the president and other ministers have admitted. And these are not simple lapses in government, very serious lapses. I don't need to go into what they have admitted, but it has caused the public dear, both in terms of discomfort, misery, and how much of productive hours of lost, standing in queues, and so on and so forth. So clearly, we cannot be politically correct. Even in public life, you have to call out to people and tell them if they are wrong. Of course, it can be conveyed in the best language, in the best way to persuade. So that is an essential feature of democracy. Coming back to the other question about the president. Now, somehow along the way, I don't know when it happened, how it happened, the cry has been for the president to go because he is the head of government, head of state, he is head of cabinet, and the buck has to stop with the president in terms of the constitution. But somewhere along the line, the whole debate has been turned into the prime minister resigning. Now, if you recall, when President J.R. Jayawardena was president and Mr. Ranasinghe Premadasa was the prime minister, he complained, he said, as a prime minister, I don't have the powers of a peon. That was a well-known statement that he made, very strong. So today what has happened is, Sir is admitting that he has failed, but you are sacking the peon.
Yeah, so that's what we got at Javed before. We said, now people don't want any of the Rajapaksa brothers. They don't want President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, nor they want Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, nor they want Namal Rajapaksa, nor they want Chamal Rajapaksa, nor they want Dipur Ranawakal, nor they want Shashindra Rajapaksa. Now, this is the general notion that is amongst the larger community in Sri Lanka at the moment. So, why isn't the president taking the responsibility, bowing down to the whim and fancy of the larger community in Sri Lanka? Because today you would have clearly seen that the 6.9 million people who voted for Gotabaya Rajapaksa were not on the streets. It was the general public who desisted this government, who wanted them out on the streets today. What do you think about it? Probably this may be the first time in the annals of Sri Lanka that politicians are scared of people. Don't you think so?
Yes, I think it is very clear, no? If you look across ordinary people, farmers, workers and so on, professionals, as was mentioned earlier by Rajiv, I think, where professionals at different levels, doctors, lawyers, who never get involved in this humdrum way of politics, have come out strongly to say it's time to go. And I think there is nothing wrong if you feel that you have made a big mistake, and if the people have lost confidence in you, to step down. There is no harm in that. Unfortunately, and this is again the fault of this constitution. I remember President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga used to use the phrase Bahubhuta Constitution, Bahubhuta Vyavasthava. I don't know what that translates into English, but it sort of exemplifies what we are faced in. We are trapped in this constitution. The president has clearly lost the confidence of the people, but the people are unable to express or even test the confidence because he cannot be removed except through an impeachment motion. But fortunately, there is a silver lining. I saw that Mr. Sumandiran has given notice of a resolution of no confidence, which is not directly laid out in the constitution, and the speaker has now agreed to include that in the order paper. So there could be a vote of no confidence on the president, and if it is passed, however, it will not have any effect except an expression of the House's view.
I believe the Samagi Jana Balavege also submitted a motion of no confidence of the same nature against the president. I'd like to question Attorney at Law Rajiv Amaraswamy regarding one matter. Now, while I was among the protesters, what some of them, or the people who were against the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna protesters who attacked the Gotago Gama protest site, what they were saying is when they were assaulting these protesters and when certain protesters were on the street tied up and others were naked on the street, what they were saying was Honda Vede, Munta Mihema Karla Madi. Those were some of the words that were uttered there. But delving a little bit deep, I got the chance to speak with some of these protesters who were bloodied and who were just barely breathing sometimes. And sometimes when you ask them, why did you come here? When I spoke to them and I asked, why did you come here? What they said was, "Nෑ මහත්තයෝ ආවේ නැත්තම් සමුර්දිය කපනවා කිව්වා මගේ." And then some people were saying, "නෑ මහත්තයෝ මට ජොබ් එකක් නැහැ. මට ජොබ් එකක් දෙනවා කියලා කිව්වා." And then there were some vehicles that were destroyed, and we found documents in these vehicles that showed that certain organizers, certain members of parliament even, had written down letters promising these people of grade 1 entrance to their children. So these are the kinds of bribes that were used to persuade average citizens to come to Temple Trees, attend this meeting, go to Gotago Gama, attack those protesters, and create violence. Mr. Amarasuriya, is this criminal?
This is misuse of public office. Our people are in a very destitute situation. A promise of something, you mentioned a series of things that we have heard of: money being given, liquor being given, jobs being promised. This is a political culture. One must not forget that this is not something which is happening for the first time. we have had May Day rallies where supporters come on promises of this nature. The difference is that this became violent today, and now there's spotlight on it. It is highlighted. So this is the political culture we have had for maybe a couple of decades. The politicians are misusing their office. Certainly there's a misuse of office, and I mean you are not entitled to promise certain things which you cannot deliver. This whole school admissions thing is completely anomalous. A lot of it still happens on letters from politicians. Technically that letter should not have any value. It's just a letter. But of course there's admission taking place, so it's a little bit more complicated than something more simple as some offense. So it should not happen. I must also say, Shalan, now we say that those at the Gotagama assaulted or dealt with those who came in. Why was that? The law enforcement authorities, first and foremost, should have anticipated, as Mr. De Silva mentioned, should have anticipated this. We all knew that something might come.
And when it's the president's life that was at risk, we saw spike barriers being put up, yes. We saw permanent GI pipes being set up, and nothing really happened there.
And if there was any threat emanating from the village, then there was a lot of activity and steps taken. So it should have been anticipated, even if assuming that it was not anticipated, say that they were not intelligent enough, the enforcement authorities, then they should have seen them coming with these poles and buttons and stopped them. It is not a short distance, it's a fair distance from Temple Trees to Golface. One would take, I would think, at least 5-10 minutes to walk or even more.
Mr. Awarsuri, just one final question before I defer to Azra for questions, of course. This incident really reminds me of one incident that also made global headlines in the past. President Donald Trump, he made a speech and he urged his supporters to march to Congress, and they did. And subsequently, of course, these people were prosecuted. The people who brought them there were prosecuted. Many people were prosecuted. Do we have provisions in Sri Lanka to really, since we're asking for accountability, since these people have been demanding for accountability,
our penal code has enough provision to prosecute them, and it must. If we say that the rule of law is observed, there's equality, equal protection of the law, then all those responsible who perpetrated the acts at this Gotagama village, all those who incited these persons to come out in this way must be prosecuted.
But the prosecution is done by either the police or the Attorney General's department.
Yes, Charlotte, if the group here, had a meeting, and if some people walked out of your studios and went and assaulted somebody, all of us would have been taken in the normal course of things. So that is the way the law would normally operate. So if there is, as I said, if there is equality, equal protection of the law, if the rule of law is properly adhered to, then all those, there must be videos, all those who incited these acts of violence, those videos the police must investigate.
I think those videos aired on television as well.
The police are even failing to arrest the individual who set fire to the bus in Midihana, which happened right in front of them. Right, Mr. Vijay Bandar?
Yes.
Isn't that a pity that, it all happens in front of the law enforcement authorities and they are turning a blind eye towards all this?
Up to now, nothing happened.
Nothing has happened. So we have a question from one of our viewers, Mr. Vijay Bandara. The question is directed at you. Now, even if the Prime Minister the President appoints a new cabinet, they would be the ones who are now in Parliament. Now the people are also saying that they don't want the 225 members as well. So in a situation like that, another viewer is saying, why not 15 independent, apolitical and competent persons selected by the Parliament being brought in to form the cabinet with the concurrence of the Parliament by 15 nominated persons stepping down to make way for their entry? Would that happen?
That is an expectation or perhaps a dream. If that is happen, that way fine. But what appears is not going to happen.
But names in the caliber of Karu Jayasuriya is being now spoken of to be appointed as the Prime Minister.
Yeah. Now the major issue as far as I am concerned is that the people, those who are on demonstration, their sentiment and political parties in the opposition, their strategies are different. These are not tallied right now. Therefore, if President, when he is having the constitutional authority and power, if he does not act on those powers, what is the alternative? I propose that all the opposition parties can get together and call for a people assembly where all the professional bodies will be participated. All administrative service can be invited. Even to go further extent, even they can invite the apex court judges also for a people's assembly. That happened in 1972 constitution. Of course, it was done after an election where the election manifesto promised the people that they will enact a new constitution to completely deviate from British ruling. But if that kind of willingness is there in the opposition parties, we can put more pressure to the President. Otherwise, all what we talk on assumption. Constitutionally, President can remain for 5 years. Parliament can remain up until next election unless President dissolve Parliament.
After 4 years.
Yes. And also it is crystal clear that the President and Prime Minister's party hold the majority in the Parliament. And with these occurrences that take place today, most of the parliamentarians now may be thinking very angrily against the entire citizens.
Yeah, so Mr. Vijay Bandara, today we saw one of the sons, it was reported on a Daily Mirror article which was published this morning, that one of the sons of Prime Minister Rajapaksa had left the country. So now the question that the people want to ask, panelists of your nature, is the fact that do we have the constitutional provisions in Sri Lanka to ensure that legal action could be taken against the Rajapaksas from leaving Sri Lanka until they are prosecuted?
Of course, preventive order can be issued against a citizen if there are criminal cases are pending. Therefore, somebody has to set in motion some criminal proceeding. Of course, against some of the members, there are pending criminal proceeding, either in courts or at the investigation stage. Therefore, in all those circumstances, it is possible to file, it has to be either done by the Attorney General who conduct the prosecution, or even there were recent incident where former governor of the central bank was prevented. Therefore, it is
we have a private plane.
Yes, it is possible.
So this action that the Bar Association, I believe, is planning on filing against the incidents that took place today, would this be sufficient to get a preventive order? I mean, we don't know really what provisions they're coming under this action, but is there any possibility that a private plane...
For that to happen, there must be criminal proceedings.
Proceedings.
Either by police or by a private plane.
So we're getting some breaking news. I'm very sorry to keep interrupting the show because I said I'll keep our viewers up to date with regard to the developments that are taking place. We are now hearing that shots have been fired into the air to disperse the crowds opposite temple trees. The story that we're following right here on News First is about the shots that are being fired into the air to disperse crowds opposite temple trees. We are receiving information and also footage from temple trees momentarily. We will try to bring that to you momentarily as well. So stay connected, stay with News First. I, of course, will keep you up to date on all the developments while the show is going on for the benefit of our viewers to keep you abreast of what's happening with regard to the protests that are taking place across many parts of Sri Lanka. Israel.
Thank you, Shamir. Mr. Yusuf, I'm just following up with the questions Shamir and Sharon asked. Another observation at the protest site today was how the protesters at the Gotagogama site were refusing to even let the opposition politicians join hands with them. They were given the same treatment that they were giving the ruling party. The same treatment was given to the opposition MPs as well. So if the protesters are not willing to accept anyone that is in power right now, be it the ruling party or the opposition, what is the alternative like?
Well, I think it is very clear that the protesters at Galface have been non-partisan in the political sense. They may have their individual political views, but they have been acting as real, say, models of civil society, independently articulating whatever grievances they have. With regard to this incident that you mentioned, I also heard about it, but there were two versions. One is that the opposition politicians were set upon by the Pohot supporters, but I don't know which is correct, but it may well be, and not only at Galface, even across the country, there are different levels of unhappiness with different opposition political groups. So one cannot say, therefore, that the whole country is rejecting all the politicians. No, this whole argument about 225 must go.
That's where I was getting at. So
yeah, that I think is absurd, because that is in one way what they mean is Parliament is failing overall. But there are a lot of good people in Parliament who are
a minority.
Minority, but still there is people of integrity, capacity, and so on.
So minority again.
Yes, again. But we cannot throw the baby with the bathwater, as it were. So the only solution for that is to have an election. So then you
but can we afford an election right now?
Yeah, no, that question, since this whole issue started, I am also of the view that we cannot afford the election because there is no money, and also the ground situation is not suited for an election campaign. But as the days go by, to me, it looks as if there is no alternative but an election, because if you see what has happened in Parliament, particularly in relation to the voting on the deputy speakers, that whole, I don't know what you call it, but it's a disgrace, because unnecessarily the government got involved in that and it scuttled the whole thing. That's why I think Mr. Ranjit Siambalapiti has resigned again. So there is there is mala fides. Now, when the president was talking with the SLFP, while he's talking to try to find common ground, he goes behind their back and poaches two of them and gives ministries. So, in this climate of distrust, I don't know whether we can actually run a caretaker cabinet for 6 months. So, I think I'm not 100% still convinced that election is the only way, but I think we are being pushed in that direction, because that may be the only way to have a break from the past and a new start.
So, Mr. De Silva, interesting thoughts by Javed, stating that we have to move towards an election given the current predicament that Sri Lanka is in. Do you bear the same opinion?
I think it is. We are going in that direction. I'll tell you why. If you speak to the leader of the opposition very clearly says, I can't join this, I can't form a government in the current scenario for two reasons. One, I can't be under the president. As long as the president is there, I can't form a government. Then he says a second thing. He says, whom do you want me to be in government with? I have a limited number of people. I must have a working majority to work a government. Do you want me to work with these people whom I can't trust? These people in respect of whom everybody is saying they're rogues. I mean, that's the word which is being used, right? We hear that the moment we go to Galface. Now, in that context, that appears to be a fairly reasonable statement.
But Mr. De Silva, we did not see such a predicament befalling the Parliament when Maithripala Sirisena took over as the head of state in 2015, following the August 8th elections, and appointing Ranil Wickremesinghe on the 9th of January 2015, when Ranil Wickremesinghe did not command the majority of the confidence of the Parliament.
That is absolutely correct. See, in that situation, the scenario was completely different.
So Sajid Premadas can do the same right now?
Not really.
Why not?
the president was Maithripala Sirisena. The Prime Minister is under Maithripala Sirisena. In the current context, you are not going and having a presidency similar to that situation. You have a president who is completely different, with whom they are refusing to work. Right?
But
So in that context, as long as the president is there, neither the JVP nor the UNP are stating that they will come and carry on with the government.
You mean SJP?
But of course, in fairness, they have stated that if somebody else forms a government, they will support on an issue-by-issue basis.
President's Counsel De Silva, now another opinion that is being articulated among protesters and people alike is the fact that speaking especially of the office of president, it comes with certain perks, let's call them. You get presidential immunity. Now it's no secret that the current president had many cases filed against him, and all of those cases were completely dropped once he assumed office on the basis that the Constitution dictates that no action, criminal or civil, can be maintained against the president. Now, against a backdrop where people are accusing the president, his family, his supporters of stealing and looting money of the people, it's only logical to think or assume that once he steps down, or once a person in that position steps down, there will be subsequent cases filed against them. And, well, I'm pretty sure even if you were in that seat right now, you would be wondering what would happen to me next. So on this basis, wouldn't this deter the head of state from stepping down because of the simple fact that if he does step down, all of these immunities will be stripped away and he will be vulnerable?
To answer your question directly, if I was in that position and if I had to step down, I wouldn't worry. For one simple reason, I wouldn't have anything to worry about. You need to worry about your immunity and cover if you have done something. Right? Otherwise, why worry? We had President Premadasa, President Premadasa did not survive, but we had President Jayawardena. He went, nothing happened to him. We had President, the one who followed D.B. Wijetunga, he went, nothing happened. We had President Chandrika Bandaranayaga Kumaratunga, she went out of office, nothing happened. So if you have been in office and you have handled your office properly, and there is no reason for anybody to file action against you, why worry about immunity? Do you and I, we don't have immunity?
Exactly.
We walk around, do we worry about immunity? We don't.
But
So
on the
if
assumption
you haven't done anything wrong, why are you worried about immunity? If you are worried about immunity, then there is a very serious reason for that. Right? And then we should see what the hell is happening there. Pardon my words.
Azra?
Mr. Amarasuriya, recently the Bar Association of Sri Lanka presented a 13-point proposal on how we can get out of this current crisis that we're in right now. And the BSL also met with the President, the Prime Minister, members of the Samagajana Balawege, and also members of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. Yesterday, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in a statement said that he is willing to listen to the 13-point proposal, but under the current constitution. I am not an expert on law, but I felt like there was something wrong with that statement. Is it possible to be okay or agree with the 30-point proposal under the current constitution of the country?
I think Mr. Vijay Bandara raised that same issue. I think in lot of the parties in good faith have adopted the BSL proposals because that is one way of coming out of this crisis. When the President says, I will look at this in terms of the constitutional, well, he's certainly entitled to do so, but that we are all bound by the Constitution. But it appears that maybe he is placing a condition when viewing the BSL proposals. Of course, some of the proposals incorporated in the BSL proposals are a little different to what we know in the form of governance and the form we have had before. So there might have to be some changes to the Constitution. And one of the changes which is at the forefront is the 21st Amendment to the Constitution. So if there is anything which doesn't tally with what we have at present, that would have to be incorporated to the 21st Amendment, and therefore the Constitution would have to be amended. So I hope that what the President meant was that I would look at the Constitution as would be amended when looking at the BSL proposal. But if he meant that, well, I will look at the proposals in the form the Constitution is at present, then of course we have an impasse because some of these proposals would not have to be able to be implemented in that way. So that is my response.
So we have a question for Mr. Vijay Bandara. Mr. Vijay Bandara, violence against those who chanted pro-Rajapaksa slogans must not be condoned or celebrated. There are no circumstances in which such violence is ever justified. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, violence always shocking to see. Therefore, we condemned violence unreservedly. Therefore, who did conduct violence is not matters. We are not enjoying to observe violence. Violence has to be condemned. But this is a constitutional crisis. That's why I cited from UN Declaration of Human Rights. When a government in totality lost the justification, the even UN Declaration says people can resort to rebellion against the government. That is what is happening right now. Therefore, my view is slightly, with respect to my colleagues, different. Now, what is protesters demanding throughout the country is not carried forward by the existing opposition political parties properly. They talk about the interim government, but not the protesters. Protesters demand a change of system, whereas most of the parties want to keep the existing system and come to a solution. That is a difference between these. That is a problem also. That is where the problem lies. Therefore, that is why I am telling this is a problem of the nation. Bulk of the community may be not properly organized, maybe without a leadership, but they demand something which is crystal clear. They demand a system change. Then whose responsibility to carry it forward? That is the meaning of political parties. Political parties are organized people for gaining power. Now the Rajapaksa government and their Porto government is in power. But people comes against that, demonstrate against that. Who is leading that sentiment? That is why I advocate it is the duty of the opposition parties to call for a people's assembly, where all the representatives of the political parties should participate. It must sit outside parliament somewhere else, and they can invite the clergies, the professional bodies, if possible at the attempt stage or subsequently, even the administrative officers, retired one or existing apex court judges.
Yeah, but Mr. Vijay Bandara, all this takes time. Don't you think so? All this seems good on paper. It all looks like very good thinking, and it looks very good ideologies and so on and so forth. But doesn't it all this take time? And right now we need a quick fix to this problem. Don't you agree?
We cannot wait. Nothing is happening day by day. You have to initiate. So far, after 1 month or more than that, nobody has initiated. Nobody has come forward to lead the sentiment of people.
You're saying we have to start somewhere?
Somewhere. That we can assume what can president do, what will happen. Just mere predictions, right? Prediction is very clear as far as I am concerned. Prediction, whatever happened, this Rajapaksa government can maneuver majority always.
President's Counsel, Javed Yusuf, now you've been part of the civil movement. You've also held certain positions that involve governing the country. Now, one of the main demands or one of the main requirements of any state, of any sovereign state, is national security. And national security has played a huge role when it comes to elections, many elections in the past. And the biggest role that national security played was in the election of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa into power, because there was a lapse. There was the April 21st attacks. Many people died, many people were injured, and people said, we want national security. We don't care who comes into power. It's great if it's a person who is outside of the system, but we want national security. And that's the reason why they voted in the former Defense Secretary, who claimed to have experience in national security matters. But today, we can see that national security, or the people's security, is not ensured. National security has come to a complete breakdown, because I can't step out of this building and be sure that I wouldn't be assaulted by a random person on the street. So when it comes to this demand of the people, national security, now the president said, look, to ensure national security, I need all the power of the executive and the legislature as well, certain powers. So give me the 20th Amendment to the Constitution. The people said, okay, here you go. He said, give me 2/3 majority in parliament so that I can ensure national security. People said, here you go, take it. And that was given as well. But all of this didn't really ensure any national security. In fact, it did the opposite. It threw our nation into jeopardy. Now there is no national security. So what more? What really needs to be done to ensure this very basic requirement of a sovereign state?
Yeah, firstly, Sharon, I must thank you, but say that I'm not a President's Council. You address me as President's Council, but I'm not a President's Council.
I'm sorry, sir.
But with regard to national security was a slogan used to motivate people to vote for this government at the last elections. And it is based on a misconception of what national security is. You don't ensure national security by having a strong and numerically large army or police, or by lining up the streets with police and army. One of the key ingredients of national security would be a contented people. A contented people who are governed wisely under the rule of law would be secure. Of course, there are so many aspects, food security and so on and so forth. But national security is really has been used, particularly after the Easter Sunday attacks, as a slogan to catapult one into power. But of course, with regard to Easter Sunday attacks, that's a different topic, so I won't get into that. But basically, national security can be ensured by ensuring a happy, contented people. That is the first matter. A disgruntled people and a society which does not, where systems don't address the grievances of the people. People must have systems which they can activate to attend to their grievances. Then a lot of things will get sorted out. Now I feel sorry. Now all of us have been in some way or the other criticizing the police. That is because of the institutional weakening of the police. Now with the 19th Amendment, a start was made to make the police independent by the police commission and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, we did not complete the process. There was not enough time to complete the process, because we have seen the police acting impartially many times. Many times they have, when they are given a free hand. If I can recount an incident several years back, when Venerable Bellanvilla Vimuratna Thero, he visited a murder house or an incident in Moratua, where the police captured the murderers within 2-3 days. And he lost it, and he said, you guys could arrest them because there was no political interference. So the police have really, they are capable of it. They have to be retrained. This is a story we have been repeating many times, that many of the police officers have been enrolled during times of emergency, where the normal laws
but Javed, if you look at the past, now you're talking about the 1990s. Let's look at 2019. Now, when the Easter Sunday bomb attacks took place, the 19th Amendment of the Constitution was still in effect. And you said right now that the 19th Amendment of the Constitution gave a lot of powers to the police. However, we saw the manner in which the former Inspector General of Police, after the caretaker government was appointed in 2018, going to the residence of Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, very well knowing that it was unconstitutional, and saluting and showing his allegiance to Mahinda Rajapaksa in 2018 when the 52-day government took place. At that time, the police had the 19th Amendment of the Constitution in play. But we had police officers who has turned a blind eye. You saw the manner in which when Vimal Veera once was at the Colombo UN compound, all this was in public domain. The police withdrew from the location and allowing protesters to go and launch the protest opposite the United Nations headquarters in Colombo.
That was before the 19th.
That was before the 19th Amendment. But we've had checks and balances, but because of the allegiance that even police officers have had towards politicians, we are in this mess today, aren't we?
No, Shamir, what I said was 19th Amendment started the process of giving independence to the police.
Yeah, no,
but the process was not completed.
The 19th Amendment of the Constitution came into play right after 2015 when the government was appointed, a few months after.
Yeah, yeah.
But now I'm talking about the 2018 constitutional coup that took place.
Yeah.
Then where the 9th Amendment of the Constitution still was in play.
No, but I say...
But we had former IGP Pujit Jayasundara going and showing his allegiance to Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa when he was appointed as the Prime Minister by Maithripala Sirisena. So if the IGP at that time at least knew what the system was, he shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, being senior officers, they should have. But what I'm trying to say is that the culture of independence to be deep-rooted in the police will take time. There has to be a lot of retraining, refocusing and so on. Unfortunately, the time was not enough.
No, but Javed, right now, there is a threat to national security. Now, people are scared. We are getting information saying there are no police officers along Dharmapala Mavata, and that the angry mobs are ruling the checkpoints that are alongside Dharmapala Mavata. National security, as we speak, is at risk. Don't you think so?
Yes, sir, that is true. That's why we have gone reverse the 19th Amendment. No? So you see, what little progress was made is being reversed. So unless we bring this to a halt and strengthen all the institutions, the police, the judiciary, the Attorney General's department, the public service and so on, we are going to be in this position. The people, the public, when I say public, the individual, the citizen who's vulnerable, who does not have access to big names and people of influence, they can only rely for justice on an independent system. So that's why we have to strengthen institutions.
Mr. Yusuf, since you were speaking about national security and the current situation in the country really, one thing that we need to admit is that once we leave our houses, or I'm pretty sure many of the people who are watching us right now are not among these people who are at these checkpoints, policing the streets during times of curfew. But even once, if a person encounters such a person, policing these streets, how do you think it's best that they act?
Well, that's a difficult question. He has to use his common sense and not, depending on the crowd. Sometimes you get nice guys even within that, or some guys who don't. So it's not a question I can really give a answer, because I don't know whether anybody else would like to try. But
I was just testing my luck. But given the current situation,
just give me a second. Because we are on this constitutional amendments. We're talking about the 19th Amendment. We're talking about the 20th Amendment. Javed, you were appointed as the Human Rights Commissioner, one of the commissioners, when the 18th Amendment to the Constitution was passed. Am I right?
No, 17th.
17th Amendment to the Constitution was passed. So you have seen everything in Sri Lanka in terms of violations. Even during your time, I just want to revisit the past. what was the most difficult times to independently carry out your task in your tenure as the Human Rights Commissioner?
Well, the Human Rights Commission, it was the first commission that was appointed, so it was new to the police and the army, the public service and so on. So they did not quite realize what the role of the Human Rights Commission was, and when they had to comply with directions given by the Commission, they were very slow to act on it. And the Commission did not have the powers to enforce. They could only make recommendations. So it was early days. So the culture had not changed as such. But now you see, if you go to now, I must actually compliment the present Commission. Even without the benefit of the 19th Amendment provisions, they are doing a marvelous job as far as I can see. But when you go to India, the Human Rights Commission's words are almost law, and the whole machinery of government over the years is geared to responding to the recommendations or rulings of the Human Rights Commission. So there's also a question of cultural change. So we have not yet reached, though I must say this commission and the previous commission have been doing a great job, but still that whole human rights consciousness that the public service as well as the police have not yet quite absorbed.
So, Mr. De Silva, when we're witnessing all this, what is next for Sri Lanka? What is the future for us? Where do we stand at the moment?
I think we are at a watershed moment. I think we should make absolute use of this situation. And let me sort of start from where Javed stopped. He made a very interesting point. He pointed out about the current Human Rights Commission. Now, the current Human Rights Commission has been appointed under the 20th Amendment. But if you see the Human Rights Commission, they are very straight. They say what they have to say. They articulate positions. They are very proactive. Why is that? I think because they have self-respect. If I may be bold enough to say, they have a spine to stand up and say and do what they need to do. Now, we are very, very good at always blaming the other party. We always blame the politicians. We always blame the public service. But we must understand that all this is ours. Public service is a part of us. So if every member of the public service did what they were supposed to do, if the citizens did what they were supposed to do, right, then we build a proper society. I might be very idealistic, but I must also tell you what I think Dr. Harsha De Silva asked at one event where there were a whole heap of entrepreneurs. He said, please put your hand up if you have not given a bribe. And lots of people did not. So why are you complaining about bribing when you do bribe? If you didn't give, the taker won't take it. So we must understand that in all these situations, we have a responsibility as well. Yes, the other party does have a responsibility, but we must do our responsibility. And in that case, I will then take the next step. Why do we have a parliament of this nature? We have a parliament of this nature because we elected them. Nobody else did. Who elected all the Rajapaksas? We did. We voted. And now we are saying, okay, they are bad. But couldn't we have contemplated that? Now, it's very sad that that has come to that. And it's very sad that we had to come to this position. So, if we are to go forward from here, we must move from this culture of thinking that we have, or the shackles that we have, and understand our responsibility. And in that context, I see a serious political awakening amongst our people. If you look at our politics before, every 5 years we go to parliament, we go to an election, put our vote, sit back, they do whatever they want, we sit back. But now we have changed that, and that's very positive. And it is necessary for us to take it forward if there is to be any change.
So,
Mr. De Silva, not to sound, sorry Shamir, not to sound too pessimistic, but if we are to go for a complete attitudinal change in the country, that might take some time. We can't survive that long, can we?
Don't we have an attitudinal change now? Is that what has happened? Now, if you look at what is happening in Galface is what we see, right? There are people there who are protesting and saying, well, we are apolitical. It just started spontaneously. Nobody organized them. But they are there and they are presenting their position and they are saying the president must go, the prime minister must go, things must change. Now that attitudinal change is here. That's one aspect. Race. Look at the position now. Now it's a very short time. Within 2-3 months, we have a tremendous attitudinal change that has come there. If you go there, you feel that. And that's remarkable. And that is why I say we need to work on that. We need to go forward on that, not backward.
So, Mr. De Silva, one of our viewers just sent me a message. You spoke about the 6.9 million people who voted in favor of the Rajapaksas and so on and so forth. The question revolves around what happens to the 5.5 million people who did not vote for the Rajapaksas at the elections.
Let me put it in a separate way or a different way. The 5.5 million people also voted for the members who sit in the opposition. Right? So therefore, I mean, this is something that the people in the opposition must understand. They haven't got a 5-year holiday. They are there to do a job of work, and that job of work is really also governance. Now that is why the opposition cannot actually shirk their responsibility at this moment. They must work in order to ensure that what they were appointed for is carried on. They were also appointed to govern. So therefore, they must take that responsibility upon themselves.
So, Rajiv, we are just hearing news that the Gazette notification has been published on the resignation of Mahinda Rajapaksa as the Prime Minister. So now it is confirmed that the resignation has been accepted by the President. What is the next step now? Now everyone is waiting. Everyone wants to know what's going to happen tomorrow.
So tomorrow morning, I think a new cabinet, a new Prime Minister will have to be appointed. The President might have a difficulty in identifying as to who commands that legitimate majority. Let us say, when one says majority, then you go back to those same numbers. But the legitimate majority in the present context, I don't know whether he will look at something for the short term to identify who, if there is no one who comes forward, or by tomorrow, hopefully, because you can't run a country with just a president. There are so many ministries now, as Mr. Vijay Bandara said, public security, defense, all those things are now, we don't have ministers.
Mr. Amarasuriya, just the off chance, there was this kind of rumor that was spreading that maybe Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa or former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa would resign and then take up the position of opposition leader. Do you think that this is apt? Because this is a possibility, because they have the majority in parliament.
It's a very anomalous situation, because he would be, it depends on how many numbers he commands. Now, he had a 2/3 majority at one point of time. So, by way of a vote, you'll have to determine, because there are groups which have gone away, but one doesn't know that they have gone back. And so, and some,
if they really did
some of them didn't sit in the opposition, then they were questioned as to why they were not sitting, then they went and sat. It's a matter of sitting back. So I think one would have to look at some kind of count, whether it's with even an opposition. You can't have MP or opposition leader who commands a majority.
I think it's like, judging by the numbers, it's physically or practically possible. I'm just speaking about the repercussions that it would have. Would it be all right if he takes up the position of opposition leader?
So he would, if he has those numbers and he's a leader of that group, then of course he's going to be a member of parliament. Just because he resigns from the post of prime minister, he is going to be in parliament, and if he's a leader of the opposition, then he would be entitled to that post.
So you're saying, Rajiv, now we have got rid of him as the prime minister.
Yeah, he's the opposition.
Now he will go and be appointed as the opposition leader.
That is not good. The demand of everyone was for him to leave as prime minister, but that doesn't mean the leader of the opposition does not hold executive power.
This is what happens, Rajiv, when people who go on retirement are taken back into politics. Don't you think so?
I don't know.
Yes. So, Mr. Vijay Bandara, looking at all this right now, I know you don't have a crystal ball in front of you and you can't predict the future. That's very well established. I'm not going to ask you a hypothetical question, but for the benefit of our viewers, what's the way forward now? Now, the Prime Minister has resigned, the Gazette has been published. Tomorrow is going to be a brand new day. What's going to happen?
No, tomorrow it cannot be happen, because if now talking to appoint somebody else who is not at the moment in the parliament as a prime minister for an interim government, that is not possible. First condition is one of those 29 nominees to the national list has to resign. Then new name has to be gazetted. We need tomorrow also curfew day. I don't think public office are at work. So you have to gazette it by the election commission, that name. So that to happen is take another 2-3 days. But with respect to all views, I am not firm believer on it. My view is up until next election, everything will happen according to the wishes of Rajapaksa. I am telling from this today. Whatever you do, now he will be a member of parliament, nobody can stop. And what he needs is to show more than 65. He will get from same party 65 or 70.
But Mr. Vijay Bandara, what if the people continue to demand maybe even for his resignation from parliament?
So that it is happening now throughout the month happening, but they are still there in different versions.
So Mr. Vijay Bandara, now I just want to go back into one of my opening questions that I posed to the panelists. Now, we have a state of emergency that has been in effect since Friday. We had the curfews that was imposed subsequent to the protest march that took place. We knew the police was at site because it was somewhat of a high security zone, which had the president's, the prime minister's residence and the Kolpiti police. Do you think the prime minister and also individuals of the likes of Johnston Fernando wanted this violence to escalate to this point? Did they envisage this? Did they want this?
Yes, what it appears from the circumstantial evidence, yes. In fact, they were aware that Gotabe Gogama is there and there is a congregation of people. And they, knowing that, they call this temple trees meeting and got people by number of buses. And they know that these two versions are not compatible. If they meet each other, definitely it will lead to confrontation. Knowing that, they allow it to happen. So they have planned, but their intention was plan it, attack it and destroy that. That is why they have deployed a major general and a contingent of army. Subsequent, the people withdraw and unsettle to take it over. But it is boomerang. This is my reading. And it's a very serious public uproar against that. So their plan scattered into pieces.
Right. So, Rajiv, now the people are on the streets. There is curfew, and we are very well aware that the Bar Association of Sri Lanka is doing a wonderful job at the moment to ensure that, at least from their perspective, the law and order is being well protected. What is your advice to the protesters who are now on the streets, who are violent in nature?
Yes, this was a non-violent protest, And the strength of this protest was that it was a non-violent protest. As soon as the protest becomes violent, then of course the state is also entitled to take steps to arrest the protesters and so on and so forth. So I know the feelings today of what took place, and people are on the roads, but it is vital that this protest goes back to what it was, which is a non-violent protest, and that is the strength of this protest. Anywhere in the world.
Don't you think, Rajiv, because of the violent nature of the protest that transpired this morning, that may have forced Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa to resign, and that in turn may pressurize even President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to resign?
Possibly, what happened today escalated into that situation where the Prime Minister resigned. But I don't think any of us responsibly can call upon the protesters to be violent, to have the President moved out with it. That will also create anarchy in the country. I don't think we are immediately at the stage where the President will also go with
it. But Rajiv, the problem is the people are angry at the moment.
Yes.
They were protesting peacefully. They were minding their own business and doing what they were supposed to do democratically to oust this government in power, and suddenly an angry mob from the SLPP comes in, attacks them, and this escalates to this level.
It's outrageous.
So then what?
It should not have happened. Those who incited that what took place must be prosecuted, must be arrested, and also the police, which watched, the enforcement officers who watched this procession leading towards Golface, must also be dealt with. Because that should have been addressed, as we did.
Their faces should be circled now and
because
taken.
It is unacceptable to see these people. I mean, I don't know from any point of view, even from maintenance of peace. So it is just an unacceptable. But having said that, one cannot call upon the people of this country to take up arms. That is essentially what your question.
No. So I am not in any way propagating or supporting the fact that arms should be taken.
So we cannot.
What I'm trying to say is
we can't go down
that
path.
We are at this juncture today because of politicians, aren't we?
Totally.
And the people cannot be blamed. Their tensions are running high.
People cannot be blamed.
Tensions are running high because what these politicians did today.
It was as I mentioned, it was a totally non-violent protest. I mean, there was so much support, and what took place today escalated into what we are seeing. And also, if you look at now, I said I came down from Kandy to Colombo. I saw many places where the youth were stopping the buses. Why were they doing that? That is because the police were not enforcing the law. If there were people who were involved in the attacks, they should have been arrested. So if they were allowed to go back to their homes, that means the police were not doing their part. So that is why the people got onto the road and replaced themselves in that role.
Shamir, if I can just pose one question to President's Counsel De Silva. Now, we've seen this argument again being brought time and time again in the past. They called these protesters at the Gota Gogama site in Golface, they called them by many names. They said this is maybe another incident like the 83 riots. And today's incidents, like I said at the beginning, reminded me of the stories that I've been told about these 83 riots. But tomorrow, if members of the governing faction come out, or the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna come out and say, look, this is what we told you, that these protests are violent. This is just like in the 83 riots. This is exactly what they did in 83 as well. They destroyed cars, they burnt buses, they assaulted people on the road. What would your response be then?
I think people saw what happened. I don't think people will buy it. Right? That won't succeed. And if they do that, I think they're making another blunder.
We have ended up
where I think we must be very careful when we deal with this situation. Actually, if you saw what was happening in Golface, and if you saw what was happening everywhere in the country, right? If you saw the Hartal, which happened on Friday, right? Practically the whole country was at a standstill. Nobody intimidated anybody to do that. That was spontaneous. So I think any politician should be able to feel the pulse of the people. Otherwise, I don't know why they're politicians, right? And they did not feel the pulse. The country was on a powder keg, and they lit the powder keg. That was what happened today. Right?
Who's the politician who lit it?
Well, look at the whole situation. Look at the videos. I think videos are circulating, right? If those videos are authentic, right, I think the people who did that are there. And I think there is a responsibility on the police and the law enforcement agencies to pursue those. We saw that a guy who did a Facebook post was taken into custody, right? Now this is far more inflammatory if in fact those statements were in fact made. We don't know, right? But if that was the case, then it is very serious. One should look at them and one should follow them.
Also, President's Counsel De Silva, now we're receiving reports that the residences and offices of many parliamentarians, local government representatives, organizers of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna have been burnt down completely. And this too being from the locals in those areas, probably people who even voted for them. So against such a backdrop, say when your constituents come and burn down your house, do you think that's a sign, enough of you representing us, please step down from whatever office you are holding?
That is putting it very mildly, right? I think the noise of that would have been, was loud and clear to everybody, right? And I think they did not hear it or they did not take it in. And that was very, very unfortunate. Because, if you look at the last 30 days, we had an exemplary protest. It was a very strong protest, but it was exemplary. It was disciplined. If you go to the President's Secretariat, they were on the barrier, but never crossed it. Right? They went to the houses of MPs, shouted outside, protested outside, never crossed the fence. Right? But today, it went across. Right? It was very unfortunate. So I think, everybody must pause at this point of time. And I think they must go back to where we were. Because I don't think we can condone the type of violence that is happening. I don't think that is something which is good for the country. And I don't think it is good for our economy. We didn't talk too much about the economy. Right? One of the biggest problems we have is not the politics of it. That's only one side of it. We must sort out our political issue because we need to sort out our economic issue.
We don't even
need to do that very fast.
We don't even have the finance ministry subject gazetted, Mr. De Silva.
I'm sorry?
Even now, we started the technical discussions with the IMF today and it will go on until the 23rd. But one major condition that they imposed was if you are to receive assistance from the IMF, which took too long anyway, now that you're getting it, you have to show that your debt is sustainable. You don't have a finance minister to sit for the technical discussions now.
Absolutely. You can't have these discussions with any of these, either with the IMF or with the other creditors, unless we have a stable government. It is not only a stable government that is required, you need credibility. And when you talk about credibility, you're talking about internal credibility, you're talking about external credibility. And I don't think our government has either, it has no internal credibility.
Right.
It certainly does not have external credibility.
So I just want to quickly ask one question from each one of you, and I want to go into the final round. Now, come tomorrow, there are 225 members in Parliament who should be appointed as the Prime Minister. Mr. Yusuf, Mr. De Silva, Mr. Amarasuriya, and also Mr. Vijay Bandara. Who is the hero who is going to be the Prime Minister, and who do you think deemed fit to lead the country? Do you have any names, Javed?
Well, I have one name, but I'm not going to express that name because my view is that all these matters, more than individuals, we need to look at policies.
Right. So, my question is, are you trying to say there is someone in Parliament? There is someone.
Not really in Parliament. But
Not really in Parliament, outside Parliament.
Outside Parliament, who will command the respect of all sections.
So, who is going to step down? Who is the patriot in Sri Lanka who is going to step down and make way through the national list to appoint this person?
No, that is why I say, now you asked that question about what's going to happen tomorrow. Now, tomorrow there is only a president, there is no cabinet. The constitution says that the direction and control of governance is vested in the cabinet. So there is no cabinet. It's like a ship in the sea just moving along. So what I think should be done is the leaders of political parties in Parliament should meet first thing in the morning and map out a minimum common program, then decide who they want to nominate as the Prime Minister, and then the next step will be to, as a first step, bring in the 19th Amendment back as a first step to leading to the abolition of the executive presidency. And if it's a caretaker government, if the 21st Amendment proposed by the SJB is taken by the government, it can be passed very fast. So then we have moved. You know, that is a kind of process that needs to be taken forward.
Right. Mr. De Silva?
I will rephrase your question. I think the question should be not who will be the hero, but who will be willing to take the responsibility of taking the country forward at this point of time. It's an onerous one, right? You have an economy which is in shambles, right? Come June, we don't know what will happen, right? I don't know who that is. One of the 225 has to stand up and take that responsibility. If one of the 225 can't do it, then they must decide, okay, let us step out and let's get somebody in who can do that. But it is not a question of who is going to be the hero.
Yeah, but do you see anyone who will take the onus on themselves and do it?
There are people within the Parliament,
okay.
in the Parliament, outside the Parliament as well. There are certainly more than one people, as far as I can see. But one of them has to get up.
But don't you think, Mr. De Silva, that this is the most opportune time for Sri Lanka to bring in that reform agenda to Parliament and ensure that we have the right checks and balances to ensure that corruption doesn't run as a cancer in this country?
Absolutely. That is why I told you that this is a watershed moment. We should make the best of it. This is the time to do the changes that are necessary, right? This is the time when everybody is talking. I mean, the people who brought in the 20th Amendment now want to go back to the 19th. They see the folly of it. They see the result of it, right? So I think if we don't seize this opportunity and do those changes, we are going to miss one of the greatest opportunities we have of doing that.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Silva. Rajiv.
This is as Mr. De Silva said, is a watershed moment. This is an opportunity. We have 225 members. There are some there who can take up the challenge. Somebody there needs to take up the challenge. But this is also an opportunity. Somebody who takes up the challenge, succeeds in the role, would also have a lot of political future. So it is, there are a couple of names which have been talked of. I think one of them has to take the lead, take the plunge, so to speak, and take matters forward. So if that fails, then there are names talked of from outside. Then one has to gazette, someone must resign, gazette someone, bring that person in and nominate. But either way, this is a national cause. This is a crisis our country is facing. So if there is no one in that 225 who's going to take on the responsibility, then of course I think the whole country will have a problem with that 225. And it is in the interest of the 225 that they bring someone forward and take on this challenge.
Mr. Vijay
This is what people say. There is a system error. So you ask question, pick a person from erroneous system. Therefore, according to this setup, I firmly say that I don't want to nominate any person. I don't see there will be persons in or outside the parliament, but I don't see they will make any change to the system. System will go on. Then people aspiration will be not fulfilled. Even for this tomorrow now, to appoint a prime minister, now we were talking to somebody outside, they have to get, it take another 2-3 days. Another 2-3 days. That is why I am telling, we are late to have a wider dialogue on this issue. It is not on the 25 parliamentarians or the parties who are representing the parliament. The outside parliament also there are people who voice. So you have to give proper representation to everybody. That is why somewhere there should be a people assembly to gather this thing, and within 1 or 2 weeks, if they can have it, inviting, then president can pick proper person.
Right, then we need to go for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's the final round. I want to pick the 4 brains who are panelists today with regard to the way forward for Sri Lanka. I know none of you have a crystal ball, but with your expert knowledge, you could predict and you could suggest a way forward for the country. Javed spoke about a ship being there and also said we are only having a captain at the moment, but a captain who has ruled himself with arrogance, dictatorial ways, autocratic regime, and all this has led to us being in this situation, unfortunately, in today's context. Who is responsible? You have the answer. We're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's the final round. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back.
දශකයක ගමනක් ඔබත් එක්ක ඔබට සවන් දෙමින් ගමීතුක හදවතින්ම දකිමින් දැනෙන යාදෙන විසඳුම් දෙමින් අකණ්ඩ ජන පෙරටු ගමන ගම්නැත්තේ දර්ශනයයි සද්භාවයක් සත්‍ය කරුණු පදනම් කොටගෙන ගම්නැත්ත පෙරට යන්නේ ජනතාව සමගින් ජනතාව උදෙසා ගම්නැත්ත රට නගන ජන පවුර
COVID-19 සඳහා ආරක්ෂිත පියවර නිතරම හොඳින් සබන් යොදා දෑත් සෝදන්න සබන් හෝ විසබීජ නාශක මධ්‍යසාරයක් භාවිතා කර දෑත් පිරිසිදු කරන්න සෑම විටම අන් අය සමග මීටරයක දුරස්ථභාවයක් පවත්වා ගන්න හැකි සෑම විටම නිවසේ රැඳී සිටින්න නිරතුරුවම නිවැරදිව මුඛාවරණ පළඳින්න
We're stronger together.
A brand new year, a year of hope, a year of aspirations and people looking for inspiration.
Our software engineers, our IT expertise are, not seconding to anyone.
A proper investigation led by the CID. This will be swept under the carpet.
Understanding about the stock market, the fundamentals, the economy, that is very important.
Entire ownership of this reclaimed land as well as the governance of Port City are all under the government of Sri Lanka.
No planet, no people, no business.
Yes.
And this is the simple thing about Biznomics.
Your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. Biznomics. Saturday and Sunday at 5 p.m.
Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We are in the final round. For his closing remarks, I now move my attention to Mr. James Vijay Bandara, Attorney at Law. What's the way forward?
There should be an interim government with agreement of all the parties are concerned. For that, I don't think that 225 parliamentarians represent the entire sentiments of the nation. Therefore, more wider dialogue is needed. That, if possible, I expect the opposition to initiate that dialogue outside parliament. Because peaceful revolution is permitted and valid, accepted as valid. If they can call for People's Assembly, inviting all the representatives of the existing parliament, plus others who are at different level, maybe civil rights organizations and those who are at Gotabaya Gogama or their representatives, and all the professional bodies, representative from professional bodies, maybe from the business sector as well, there should be some common forum for the nation. And whatever the proposal, including the BASL proposal, has to be put forward before such a forum, and some kind of agreement has to be reached. Thereafter, within the parameters of the existing constitution, we can identify who are going to be the 15 members of the cabinet. If there is a overall agreement among all the parties concerned, parliament, within parliament or outside parliament, then it is convenient and it is you can easily pressurize the president to appoint them, and then even 15 people to resign from the parliament exiting out of those 29. It's also possible, provided there is a national-wide agreement. But the things, if the present parties expect everything to be done within this 225, I'm afraid it will not work. That is my final conclusion.
Thank you very much, Mr. James Jabandar, attorney at law. Javed Yusuf, attorney at law and author.
Yeah, the thing is, I think we are already late to try to find a way forward because this thing has been going on for so long. So in order of priority, the first thing we need to tackle is the issue of basic essentials to the people, but that cannot be tackled under the present administration. So we need to get, following the Prime Minister's resignation, get the parties to sit together, prepare a common minimum program, and then decide on the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister will be tasked with implementing that program, where some major changes have to be quickly done. Like, as I said, first step, 19th Amendment, thereafter moving to the abolition of the executive presidency. Then you can start dealing with some of the immediate economic issues, like dealing with the IMF and trying to revive the confidence of the international community in Sri Lanka and thereby get them to help us. So I think that is the immediate way forward. Of course, it's going to be a long haul for economic recovery in the total sense, but all this requires wise, prudent leadership, and that is something we hope we will get.
Thank you very much, Javed Yusuf, attorney at law and author. Rajiv Amarsurya, former secretary of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka.
Shamir, I think there are two aspects one must look at. I think first and foremost, the violence which we see on the road today must come to an end. I think that is essential. We must call upon the people to act with restraint because violence is not an answer to the problems today, and hopefully tomorrow will be a day where we will not see any such acts of violence, and then we can concentrate on governance. Now, on the governance aspect, I think today is a day when one of the items of the proposals of several institutions, the Bar Association has set out a very comprehensive set of proposals, and one feature of the proposals was for the Prime Minister to resign. And today we have seen that the Prime Minister has now resigned. So I think it is a tick on one of the steps to go forward. There is another grouping of professionals which has recently formed, which includes other professions, Direction Sri Lanka, and that also this is one of the main features. So on that aspect, I think there is progress in this change. There was an impasse until today, and we have seen that the first step of change has now taken place. So now, what is the way forward? A cabinet of ministers has to be set in place. Whoever that may be, it must be a cabinet which can take through the changes which everyone is calling for. I think there is a urgent need to trim the powers of the president, which are enhanced by the 20th Amendment. So within a course of days, I think the 21st Amendment, whether it's the bill which is presented by the SJP, or whether the government takes on, whether in the same form or in a modified form, I think Mr. Vijayadasa Rajapaksa had submitted another proposal. But whatever may that be, with consensus, I think it is essential that one moves to the 21st Amendment, and then focus must be placed on the technical level meetings taking place in Washington, because every day we have shortages across the board on everything. Even medicines we are in short supply, and every day we go by without a solution, we are the country is losing. So I think the priorities must be placed, and of course there are proposals in place, and then this is a very dynamic, changing system. One may have to look at it day by day, week by week, but let us concentrate on what needs to be done, and then follow this through.
Thank you very much, Rajiv, for your thoughts as well. Chanak De Silva, President's Council.
I will look at it in the context of what needs to be done. We have two questions or two major issues in front of us. We have a political issue. We have perhaps even a much more significant economic issue. And I think if the country is to move forward, we must address both these issues, not one. Now, as far as the political issue is concerned, what we require the 225 who are there to do is to build or establish a government which has credibility and in which the people will have confidence or trust. Because if the government that they establish does not have the confidence or trust of the people, they can't do the changes that are required to do the economic aspect of it. So it is fundamental that what you do immediately now in establishing the government is something which will be acceptable to the people and not the type of things that they were doing in the past. Then we go to the second question. Now, once you establish a government of that nature, we see that the country has to go through a very significant situation, right? We have to increase our income. That means the taxes will have to go up. It is going to be a difficult time. Then our expenditure has to come down. At the same time, the very vulnerable section of the sections of the society must be looked after. Now, those are the three key things internally. Externally, we have a huge debt which needs to be properly restructured. We need to have bridging finance which will take us from where we are now until the time we are able to do that bridging finance. We can't do that if we do not establish a government which has credibility internally and externally. And the government should be able to bring stability to the situation now. This situation can't continue. So therefore, I think that is the thing that must be done perhaps within the next 2-3 days by the entire 225 in the parliament. If they can't find the people to do it, that from within, please take immediate steps to get the people from outside, because the country needs to go forward from here.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chanak De Silva. Thank you very much, Javed Yusuf, attorney at law and author, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Chanak De Silva, President's Council, attorney at law Rajiv Amar Surya, former Secretary of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. I must thank Rajiv. It was a very last-minute call, Rajiv, that we made to you, and thank you very much for coming all the way from Kandy to join us tonight on Face the Nation. And thank you very much, Mr. J.M. Vijay Bandara, attorney at law, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Thank you very much, Shalan. Thank you very much, Azra, for joining us this evening on the show. It was a tiring day for Azra and Shalan today, ensuring that they were providing the stories and the news to the gentlemen. Azra was also on air today, right throughout. And thank you very much, Azra, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. Corruption is a cancer that eats away at a citizen's faith in democracy and diminishes the ability to survive. As I said at the opening remark, we may not have gone where we intended to go, but we think we have ended up where we needed to be. Take care and good night.